Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka YOLO Swaggins, and this video we're breaking down Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. The first two episodes have just dropped on Amazon Prime Video, and throughout this we'll be talking about all the Easter eggs in it, callbacks or call forwards, and what you need to know about the characters and locations. Now I think we'd be remiss for not talking about House of the Dragons and the similarities to it. Both are prequel stories set before the events of the main series, and they adapt elements of the slightly less famous books to tell a story that will likely set up things for the main one. Now I got to check out these episodes earlier in the week, and I was asked how it compares to the Game of Thrones prequel, and I ended up explaining it like this. I feel that both this and House of the Dragons tie into the things that they tie into, and they're comparable in the same way that Lord of the Rings is to Game of Thrones. Both deal with legends involving mystical myths, but it's the tone that sets the two apart. To be completely honest, my brain is kind of from trying to hold every bit of lore from both in it, but as long as I say Sean Bean once per breakdown, I think I should be alright. Farewell to the happy memories of my first date with my wife, you're getting replaced with a dwarves family tree. Now the series will take elements from the Silmarillion, which was a book written by J.R.R. Tolkien that was then edited by his son Christopher and released after his death. It's divided up into 5 parts, with the first telling the creation of Ea, which is another name for the universe. It's very much a biblical parallel that follows a god known as Iluvatar, who creates all that is. Also, pronunciation in this video, it's going to range from stuff like Iluvatar, Iluvator, Iluvator, and just me genuinely getting most of the stuff wrong. Anyway, the book talks about him making the Earth, which is called Order, and his children who'd gone to become the elves and men. The planet was Order, better, faster, stronger, but it was destroyed by the rebellious Melkor. Melkor was also known as Morgoth, and he's a character whose name pops up at several points in these opening episodes. Now the Silmarillion explains the name change like it's a sort of Voldemort situation, where the name Melkor gets associated with evil to the point that the elves won't mention it, and instead they say Morgoth. Morgoth. Now we learn that the men were loyal to him, and that they're now paying the price with elves keeping them all in check. Morgoth was basically Middle-earth's answer to Lucifer, and though he was initially created by God to be a force for good, over time he turned against his master. Now this is why the opening line of the series by Galadriel says nothing is evil in the beginning, and this show will likely have her depicting how a constant quest for vengeance can cause a lot of issues. Now eventually, Morgoth became the first Dark Lord, which then ushered in Sauron. Sauron in the book is described as always walking behind him, to the point that he ends up very much becoming his shadow. Now that's everything you need to know about the first part of the book, and the second describes the supernatural powers of Ea, with the third chronicling the events of the First Age. This includes the war over the Silmarils, which popped up in the second entry. The fourth section takes place in the Second Age, and this recounts the fall of Numenor, and the final segment is based around the Third Age and the Rings of Power. Unfortunately, there's so much stuff to cover that we won't be able to go in depth on it here, as I just want to stick to the main things. But I've got to give a massive shout out to the YouTube channel Nerd of the Rings, who put together so much expansive material on the series, books, and also films. You'll be Galadriel that you check them out, and also make sure you hit the like and sub on these videos, as we're covering the series every week. Anyway, we start off with Galadriel narrating the story to us, and this is of course riffing on the opening of the Fellowship of the Rings. This introduction echoes the prologue of that film, and we have a big exposition dump that's also filled with a major battle. Galadriel talks about how before there was even a sunrise, there was light, and you old science folks out there might be wondering how this is. Well, when Iluvatar first created Order, he made it completely flat. Eventually, the world would twist into a globe, but in this age it was lit by 2 trees of Valinor. These were the golden ones, which was called Laurelin, and the silver one, which was called Telperion. These were destroyed by Morgoth like what we see here, and we join a young Galadriel making a boat that she sails down a river. Eventually, this opens up into a swan, but it's dumped into the water by the other kids. Now it could potentially foreshadow how Galadriel jumps off the boat at the end of this episode, and there are a couple of lines here and there that sort of set this up. This is through her brother Finrod, who tells her the parallel about why a stone sinks. He states that because it only sees downward into the darkness of the riverbed that it's tempted by this, leading to it sinking down to the bottom. Again, this could be a reach, or it might highlight how Galadriel's quest for revenge ends up pulling her back into the water and away from the silver shores. He also tells her that the ship sails because it looks up into the sky at the light, but she's confused over which direction to go, tying into her very much wrestling with her overall quest. After the trees are destroyed, the land plunges into darkness, and they all sail from Valinor. Lots of foreshadowing to the end of the episode at this point, including the sea, clouds that form on the horizon, and the birds that pop up at the end. We also see a giant serpent in the Sundering Sea, and one of these attacks Galadriel's rescue boat in the second episode. I'll talk about this more when we get to that, but the sea serpents were referenced in Tolkien's work, and he referred to them as being fish dragons. Now the elves travel to Middle-earth, and we see the battle in all its glory, with our initial focus being on a hellhawk. This was the same type of creature that the ring wraiths would later ride, and I'll talk about how we might be setting up one of these later on. Now we see bodies floating in a sea of red, and I believe that this montage encompasses all of the War of Wrath, which marked the end of the First Age. I also got a lot of vibes of Sauron's eye in the tower from the red glow emanating off the ones in the back. Now it's possible that this is the first kinslaying, which had Fëanor leading his forces of elves to attack the Teleri elves in order to take their ships. We see elves floating in what appears to be water, with an elf spear impaling an elf, making me think that it could be this. Now it was during the Second Age that we saw the rise of Sauron, and this is basically where all the show will be taking place, with The Lord of the Rings being set in the Third Age. We had a lot of elf-on-elf crime, the war lasted for centuries, and it completely rocked Middle-earth, with there being countless deaths which we see demonstrated in the pile of helmets. Whereas the elves originally never had a word for death, because of this conflict they ended up gaining several. Orcs spread throughout the land, and it's at this point that we're introduced to Sauron, who, like the books, is Morgoth's most faithful follower. Now Finrod in the source material was searching for a Silmaril, and he was captured by Sauron, which led to an epic battle of song. It was basically like when they do a sing-off on The Voice, and in the books he was killed by wolves in Sauron's fortress. When we cut to Finrod's body, we can actually see claw marks in his arms, and I believe that this is tying back to his fate. Now it's at this point that we also see Sauron's symbol for the first time, and this pops up throughout. Even the elves can't figure out what it means, and I've seen theories that it's a map of Mordor as well as it even being an eye. Let me know below what you think, but Galadriel vowed to take revenge on Sauron, and she took her brother's 2 tree daggers which she carries with her at all times. Now let me know if I'm reaching, mate, but I got a lot of vibes of the aftermath of World War II laced throughout these 2 entries. We have symbols that carry connotations with them, and Galadriel could be seen as a metaphor for the Nazi hunters trying to track down agents of evil. There's also the land of men that used to work with Morgoth, and after the war ended, many countries that were loyal to the Germans were looked over by the Allies, similar to what the elves do here. Again, I might be drawing comparisons that aren't there, but as we're analysing it, I thought I'd talk about how I perceived some of the themes. Now Galadriel and her group literally hunt Sauron to the ends of Middle-earth, and they scale giant mountains in an attempt to try and track him down. It's clear the rest of the company's heart's not in it anymore, and they want to give up the hunt. All the leaders also think that Sauron is no more, and this was of course echoed in the main trilogy when most thought that he died, though his fate was tied to the One Ring. Now we of course know that the big battle is coming that was shown at the start of the Fellowship, and I'm guessing that the series might even culminate with a lead into that. On the mountain top they managed to find refuge, and if you look at the stairs in the background, then you'll recognise them as being the same one that Sauron walked down during the narration scene. It's where the orcs went after the fall of Morgoth, and Galadriel once more locates Sauron's symbol, which acts as a trail whilst he's lying low. The investigation's quickly broken up by what's been called a snow troll, and Galadriel makes mincemeat of it using her brother's dagger to finish it off. Anyway, time for a joke. What's Gandalf's favourite band? The Eagles. Thank you. What a terrific audience. Anyway, Galadriel's company steps down, and we cut to Rhovanion. In the books, this was a small area east of Mirkwood that had the great river Anduin flowing through it. We initially see 2 walkers carrying giant antlers on their back, and though we don't know these specific characters, I believe that they're nomadic hunters. The main people that inhabit this land are the Harfoots, who were the predecessors to the Hobbits. These were along with the Stuars and the Fallowhides, who are all mentioned in the Concerning Hobbits chapter. Living in the woods, I loved seeing how they all had their little hideaways, and we predominantly follow Eleanor Brandyfoot, whose nickname is Nori. Invented for the series, we see she goes berry picking with her sister and some kids, but this is interrupted by a warg. Now the design for these has changed a lot, with them having hooves instead of paws, and they also look a lot like Enteldonts. She also discovers a character known as the Stranger who falls from the sky, but we'll talk about him more later on in the video. Nori very much represents the hobbit that longs to leave their home, and though most of them tended to stick to what they knew, we had the offshoots like Bilbo who sought out adventure like her. Due to their small size, hobbits saw safety in numbers, which is an idea that her mother hammers home into her head. Cut to Elrond, who's relaxing by a tree, similar to how we were introduced to Frodo. He's not yet the Lord of Rivendell, and whereas the movies would see him holding the Council of Elrond, Here, he's not allowed to attend the one happening that day. This is taking place in Lindon, which is the capital of the High Elves. This was actually where Frodo sailed from at the end of the Return of the King, and it's also where Galadriel departs from come the end of this entry. We catch her looking over a mural dedicated to this voyage, which is basically like when people move to Florida to retire. The journey into the West is described in a lot of Tolkien's work, and most of the elves left to go there at the end of the Third Age. Elves are immortal, and therefore they try and preserve as much as possible, whereas men come and go, so a lot of things change with them. The undying lands of Valinor were very much kept in a similar state for eternity, and it was placed beyond the reach of mortal men because we just probably mess it up. Treat it like a weekend away in Magaluf. Now, though not seen as an afterlife, it's very much a place of peace, rest, and relaxation, and it even helped Bilbo and Frodo with the wounds that they'd sustained. Now Galadriel is told to go there because she defied the King Gil-galad. It's said he'll forgive her disobedience as long as she sticks to the plan, but she of course ends up turning against this. Now initially he doesn't believe that Sauron still exists, but we know from the overall story that he does eventually end up heeding the warnings. He's pretty much the ignorant, high-ranking member of the government stereotype character, and I think he's like this because the elves lost so many that he just wants to avoid any more conflict. Not to spoil too much of what happens to him, but he's probably going to have a really interesting arc in the series. Now that night we see an incredible firework display, echoing the one shown at Bilbo's birthday party at the start of the Fellowship. Galadriel very much feels like she's letting her brother's memory down by leaving, and she even says that she expected to rest amongst the carved trees rather than travelling to the west. Elrond at this point isn't the warrior that he'd come to be, and his arc is likely building to the character fighting in the big battle against Sauron. Next we jump across to the Southlands and join Arondir, who learns he's being pulled out. Should have pulled out like Theo's dad, but instead he investigates the destroyed village, as well as something lurking beneath the surface. Arondir is an elf scout put in charge of guarding over the area, and we can catch the face of an Ent on his armour. These pop up later in the episode as the meteor crashes to Earth, and I hope we get to see them at some point in the series, because they provide a lot of entertainment. Fuck. So bad. Now he's got a sort of will they won't they relationship with Theo's mother Bronwyn. Relationships like this were of course forbidden, but we've seen it pop up in the series, even happening with Elrond's daughter Arwen and Aragorn. There's a lot of talk about how crops are dying, and slowly the land is being corrupted. This is something similar to what we saw with Radagast the Brown, whose home slowly started to become shrouded in a darkness that was poisoning the land. The animals around him became very ill, and this is similar to the cow whose milk turns to black sludge. The Silmarillion talks about how things like this first alerted the elves to Morgoth, who had hid himself away and had slowly started corrupting the landscape. There still exists an uneasy alliance with the men because obviously the elves are basically the police, and some of them still hate the humans for siding with Morgoth. Arondir doesn't want to leave his post, and he's found a home with them, so move over Theo, say hello to your new stepdad. Now Theo has possession of a black blade, and we see that it's been shattered. This is similar to Aragorn's sword Anduril, which was shattered during the battle with Sauron before it was reforged in Rivendell. Now what this sword is, we don't know, and I actually spoke to Matt at Nerd of the Rings about it, and he broke down what's likely the case. I thought it might be Garthang, but he said that Amazon don't actually own the rights to the Children of Hurin, which they'd have to talk about in order to properly introduce that blade. Instead, he thinks that it's possibly a Morgul blade, as it reforms instead of disappearing. You might notice it's visually similar to the way the Morgul blade disappears when Aragorn grabs it, only here it happens in reverse. Now due to having the symbol of Sauron on it, it could have been formed at the forge where Galadriel found the mark, and it may pull from the Unseen World. This is the Wraith World where you pulled into after being stabbed by one of the blades, and it's where Frodo starts to go in the Fellowship. Elsewhere, Elrond is assigned to Lord Celebrimbor, who is said to be one of the greatest elven smiths. He and Elrond end up travelling to Eregion, which is where they see Theanor's hammer. This helped to create the Silmarils, and after Morgoth stole them, he stared at the jewels for weeks. The book talks about how he saw so much beauty in everything, but this ate away at him, and eventually it caused his anger and rage to fester. The idea of items corrupting people of course appears throughout Lord of the Rings, and it could also be linked to the sword. He talks about using Elrond's help to build a powerful forge, and skip ahead 20 seconds if you don't want a minor spoiler for the books. I'm just waiting for you to skip ahead. Are you still here? Okay, so Celebrimbor actually ended up helping to create the Rings of Power for the elves, so this forge is likely going to be what makes them. He also created the Elf Stone for Galadriel, which was later given to Aragorn. You've seen the original movies, mate. You know all about the rings, but yeah, just thought I'd put a spoiler warning in case you didn't want things ruined. Anyway, quick, they're coming back. Shh, shh. And so I said, you tried really hard on this test, Timmy, but you shall not pass. Hey, we'll have a laugh. Now, the episode ends with a stranger crash landing on Earth, and that takes us into theory time. So, though the main theories surrounding this guy tend to be that he's Gandalf, I don't think that's the case. Wizards don't tend to age, and they came from the sea instead of the sky. Gandalf also didn't emerge until the Third Age, and though they're not sticking completely to the canon, I think it would just cause too much controversy to have him drop in this way. However, he is potentially a wizard, and he might be a blue one who helped to contest the will of Sauron. Now, if we're going full tinfoil hat here, then it might even be Sauron masquerading as a wizard in order to trick the elves. When Meteor Man crash lands, he burns an eye shape into the floor, and the fire also goes back into him. He also controls the fireflies later on, and Sauron's eye itself was of course made of a burning fire. And we see his leaves fall with his arrival, and this is corrupted with the black goo that's synonymous with the character rising up. Sauron does need to appear at some point in order to build towards the big battle at the end of the Second Age, and so far the episodes don't really have a villain. Well, outside of maybe Theo, I guess, but he's not that bad, so it would be good to get an antagonist appearing as a friend. The books did say that Sauron came from the shadows, but they could be changing his return into a celestial event. And this could also be the most obvious thing, and it may be the creative team tricking us into thinking it's him so they can pull the wool over our eyes. This could even be Ilúvatar, who could be returning once more in order to transition everyone from the Second Age into the Third. Nori does believe it's a positive thing and that she was meant to find him, so I'm actually leaning more towards it being a wizard out of the possible theories. He ends up shouting, which rocks the environment, and this is similar to what we saw Saruman doing in order to control the weather. He also accidentally snaps Largo's ankle through using a branch, which is similar to a Wanderer's staff. Now the firefly thing could be similar to how Gandalf speaks to insects, and if you cast your mind back to the Fellowship, he actually reached out to the eagles by speaking to one that then passed on the message. He wants to find a certain constellation of stars, and in the end, Nori's going to help him get to it. Either way, the stranger seems to be causing a lot of death and destruction, so no one knows whether he's good or bad yet. Let me know your thoughts below on what you think, and I'll probably steal them and put them in the next video. But at the moment, that's the end. Now as the meteor comes down, we see Arondir and Bronwyn holding hands, and also get Galadriel's choice, represented by her brother's blade and her elf kin trying to pull her in. As the meteor crashes down, she jumps into the open waters, and that takes us into episode 2. Now she ends up coming across a shipwrecked crew, and she gets attacked by a giant worm, which I'm still calling a fish dragon. I absolutely love the way they shoot the scene when she tries to swim away from it, and seeing the camera go above and below the surface really adds to the intensity of the attack. In the end, all that's left are her and Halbrand, who's a new character that's being created for the show. There are theories that he might end up becoming the Witch King, as that character's true identity is still unknown. If that's the case, then I think it negates the Sauron twist with the stranger, as it would be stupid to have two people turn out to be some of the big bads. Now we discover that he and the others were chased from their home by orcs, which eventually confirms to Galadriel that Sauron is still working away. He says that the enemy is in the Southlands, making me think that their story is going to tie in with Arondir and Bronwyn's very soon. I love the way that there's this horror feeling to the entire situation at sea, and this is mirrored in the orc that attacks Theo and Bronwyn. It's really nice how it calls back to horror moments in Jaws and slasher films in general, leading to two great scenes in episode 2. Now in what's a more calm scene, we watch as Elrond and Celebrimbor go to Khazad-dûm. You might recognise this from the main trilogy, and it's where the Fellowship ended up facing off against the Balrog. Now the main gates to the Mines of Moria had the Watcher in the water residing in the lake outside of it. Here we can see the stones and water that surrounds it, but it doesn't look deep enough to eventually house the squid. Therefore I'm guessing that this is an alternative entrance, and that's why the doorway can be seen in the light. Love how they have a bouncer on it, and I got a lot of vibes of Jabba's palace, and some of the nightclubs that I visit with Ryan Airy. Just don't tell the wife. Now he challenges Durin to a forfeit, and he's eventually allowed inside. I believe this is happening at the point where the dwarves have only recently found mithril, which was used to create extremely durable armor. At the end of the entry, Durin talks to his father about whether Elrond knows their secret or not, and we get a sort of Pulp Fiction scene where they open up a chest. We don't see what's inside of it, but the glow emanating from it makes me think that it could be that. However, they may have also unearthed the Silmaril, and if they're playing fast and loose with a canon, then that would make sense for the overall plot. Now going back to the mithril, we saw as Bilbo and Frodo had a shirt made out of this, and it's likely that the mineral will be discovered in the series. That's if it hasn't been already, and we meet Durin the Fourth's father, Durin the Third, and the rest of his family, whose birthday parties probably aren't worth going to either. Now Durin the Fourth was actually believed to be Durin the First reincarnated, as he acted exactly the same as him and the pair looked identical. At this point he's a prince, with his father still being the king, hence why he ends up handing Gil-galad's proposal over to him rather than making a decision himself. We see the contest involves smashing rocks like their like buttons, and Gimli tried a similar tactic when he attempted to smash the ring at the Council of Elrond. Elrond takes the elrond, and he ends up being outcast, but this gives him a private audience with Durin, which is where the pair mend their friendship. Elves and dwarves came to dislike each other by the Third Age, but here they have a friendship, though most of the elves are like, "Lol, you'll be dead soon, Lamau." Now this is given lip service by Durin, saying that he's been gone 20 years, and Elrond says, "Has it been only 20? You bloody arrogant twat." Now due to the way that elves view time in comparison to the dwarves, a lot of friendships frayed, and you get so much subtext from just this one line. So anyway, Elrond concedes, and Durin escorts him out, which is when the pair slowly mend their friendship after he stays for dinner. Here we meet Disa and Durin's kids, and we see that there also exists a tree within their home. This is actually a sapling from Linden, and though it was thought it wouldn't grow in the mountain, the love between the pair has brought it to fruition. Arondir does a little digging where the enemy has done a little digging, and we get a scene where he crawls through the tunnels that reminded me a lot of the vent scene from Alien. Where he's taken to, we don't know, but Sauron liked to torture those he'd captured, which is a similar situation to what happened with Galadriel's brother. Theo and Bronn get up close and personal with the orc, and after she confirms the kill, the villagers decide to head off to the Elven Tower. Theo takes a sword with him that draws blood towards it, and this starts to rebuild the blade, showing how the darkness will follow them wherever they flee. The episode ends with Galadriel and Halbrand surviving a storm, and after the latter saves her life, they start to form a bond. Now where they're going was shown potentially in the latest trailer. If you don't want any future spoilers, then turn off now, and huge thank you for checking out the video. Really appreciate you sitting up until this point, and hopefully I see you back next week. You take care of yourself. Now where they're likely heading is Numenor, which we know is going to be a big focus in the series. We have seen shots in the most recent trailer, and these contain boats sailing towards the city. They have similar sails to what we see here, and we also see Halbrand at what appears to be a port. Numenor is likely going to become a big location in the entry, and the fall of it is one of the major moments in the Lord of the Rings lore. Now we also have shots where wargs approach the stranger, and I'm guessing that this will bring the one from episode 1 full circle, as we haven't had any resolution from that in these two entries. You can actually see Nori hiding away in the tree behind him, so it's clear that the pair head off into the forest. Anyway, those are the main things that I wanted to talk about that I think will happen next time, and as for my thoughts on the episodes, I did enjoy them, even though I thought there was some dips pacing wise depending on who we were following. Now full disclosure, I have worked with Amazon before, and I do get early access to the shows. I thought I'd drop that before my full review, so you kinda know the extent of my relationship with them, and you can judge for yourself whether I'm a paid shill that rides in the Shillennium Falcon. Now I know there's a lot of controversy around the series, and I tried to go into this judging it off its own merit, rather than the conversation surrounding it and how I am with Amazon. So all that out the way, what did I think? Well, I absolutely loved the first 15 minutes of episode 1, and I thought that they did a great job of recapturing the feeling of Peter Jackson's films, whilst also going off in their own direction. The prologue was brilliant, and you can definitely see why this is the most expensive show of all time. There's a cinematic feeling to the entire thing, and watching Galadriel and her company scaling the mountains completely blew me away. However, I did think the mid part of that episode, namely the stuff with Arondir, kind of fell a bit flat, and it took a while to get going. I'm kind of in two minds about the first episode, and after seeing them both twice, I feel that they should have just released the first due to the cliffhanger that it had at the end. Now the second episode didn't have the bigger moments that the first one did, but I do think that overall it was more consistent. The raft scenes were all great, and moments like this are rarely shown in TV shows due to how complicated they are to film. I also love the horror elements of the orcs, and there was a mystery involving certain characters. I feel like Morphic Clark is really carrying the show, with her delivering a performance that has a lot of rage, pain, and emotion to it. She's the standout for me, which is then followed by Elrond, who I think is also doing a stellar job too. My man who played Durin was great as well. I think there is a lot to like here and lots of interesting characters. I probably prefer the first 2 episodes of House of the Dragon over this, but I still think there's a lot to like here, and I hope that people go into the series with an open mind because it has so much potential. The scale and scope of it is like nothing we've seen on TV before, and though it's started off slow, I think there are a number of ways that they can take it. I think now that we've got the character introductions and world building out the way, that they can just hit the ground running next week, and I am excited to see what happens. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts, if you agree, disagree, whatever. I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of opinions on the series, so make sure you comment below and let me know. We are running a competition right now and giving away 3 copies of Top Gun Maverick on the 15th of September, and all you have to do to be on the chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the episodes. We pick the comments at random at the end of the month, and the winners of the last one are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at HeavySpoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of House of the Dragon, which will be linked on screen right now. We go over all the ins and outs of episode 2, talk about how it connects to the books, and also just have a great time going through it bit by bit. Overanalyzing it is my hobby. Now, if not, thanks for sticking through the video. Hope to see you in the next one. Take care. Peace. Bye bye.